Patriots Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network and on Patriots Press Pass. I'm Evan Lazar, joined as always by Alex Barth. We're going to talk about some of the happenings at the owners' meetings. Robert Kraft speaking to reporters this morning, Bill Belichick speaking to a media contingent yesterday down there in West Palm Beach. We're also going to hit on the overtime rules and the changes to the overtime rules for the postseason, but we got to start with the signing of the day for the Patriots. The Pats bringing in a player that once upon a time, Alex, at least in my world, I always used to say that Jabrill Peppers was a guy that I thought Bill Belichick could get the absolute most out of. You used to watch him at Michigan, that 2016 Heisman finalist season, and you see a player that has so much potential, so much versatility, so much athleticism, and you just said, wow, that's the type of guy that Bill Belichick gets his hands on. He's going to be an absolute stud in the Patriots system. Took him 5 years to finally get him here, but now the Patriots have Jabrill Peppers on a 1-year deal. Out of all of the low cost, high reward moves that they've made this offseason, all the little bargain buys they've had, this one feels like it has the most potential to have the highest upside. Maybe not the longest term, but the highest upside.
Yeah, I absolutely love this signing, and you kind of talked about it there off the top, but there's a handful of players in the last 10 years in college football that, you know, you look at him and you think, man, if Bill Belichick could get his hands on him, and normally they're guys that are out of the Patriots range. Like I remember Christian McCaffrey was a guy that I personally, I think a lot of other people said that about, like, man, if Bill had Christian McCaffrey in this system, what would happen, right? And Peppers and McCaffrey are probably the two guys, and then Tyrann Mathieu would be the three guys I really think of in that mold. And yeah, I think he fills a lot of needs short term. I think he could long term. I know it's a 1-year deal, and that's probably about right. But, you know, he's going to come in initially, probably be a box safety, probably play some linebacker. He can rush the passer, too. He's a really good pass rusher for somebody his size. They're going to be able to use him everywhere. I mean, he can play from the defensive line to the back end. And I wonder, you know, long term, Devin McCourty's 35. He feels pretty year to year at this point. If he's a potential long-term replacement for Devin McCourty, or if having him as a box safety, Evan, I know you're somebody who's talked a lot about as good as Duggar is in the box, you would love to see him playing on that back end, playing that center field role. So whether it's Peppers back there, or whether it's Peppers sliding into the box to allow Duggar to play that deep role, I wonder if this affords them the opportunity to maybe start thinking about, you know, who's next after Devin McCourty, if it could be one of those two guys. So like you said, super low risk contract. I think it's up to $5 million, right? You know, good deal there. I still think Peppers can play. The other thing to remember about him, and I wrote about this on 98.5thesportshub.com before we came on. You can check that out. You know, again, he just a stud at Michigan. I mean, he was one of the most electric players in college football. He was probably the second best safety in all of college football for the decade of the 2010s. Tyrann Mathieu was number one, who, by the way, is also a free agent. And if somebody puts those two together on the same defense, I will lose my mind. If it's the Patriots, even better. Would love that. But, you know, just an absolute stud at Michigan. Athletic freak, really good player. He won pretty much every postseason award he could win in 2016 as a linebacker and as a safety. And he kind of hasn't showed up as much in the NFL, but he's been in some bad spots. I mean, he gets drafted by the Browns. He's on that 0-16 team that was a mess. Started to figure it out his second year. Then he gets traded to the Giants in the Odell Beckham deal. And here we go. You know, he's got a reset there. That was another really bad team, a really bad situation. 2020, Joe Judge comes in. They make him a captain. He had a really good year. He actually was a good player in 2020. And then last year he tore his ACL. So I don't know that his lack of NFL success, look, you can always, expect a player to do more. I don't know how much of Pepper's lack of success in the NFL I put on him. I think he's been in some really bad circumstances. I'm not saying the Patriots are what they were 10 years ago, but this right now is the best situation he's ever been in. It's the best situation he's been in since Michigan. I know he's coming off that torn ACL, but boy, if it really feels like if he was going to click, this is the time and place to do it. And if he does click, if we do get, because he's shown flashes, but he hasn't done it consistently. If we can consistently see Michigan, Jabrill Peppers in the Patriots defense, that could really be something. He'll be a playmaker. He'll be not just a contributor, but an impact player if all of that happens.
Yeah, it's one of those moves where you hope that Bill Belichick is going to put him in the right places, use his skill set properly, and tap into that first round potential. This is still a player that ran in the mid 4.4s at 213 pounds, sub 7 second three cone, over 35.5 inch vertical leap at the combine in 2017, and then also had probably the best defensive season of any player in that draft in 2016 on tape. So that guy, I do think, still exists somewhere in that mold. Now, is he going to be as good as what he might have been coming out of college if the Patriots could have gotten their hands on him in the 2017 draft? No, the Pats didn't have a first round pick in that draft, and it wasn't going to happen regardless. I still look at the guy in Jabrill Peppers that he is now. I had turned on that tape last year from the Giants, and I get he's coming off the ACL, but it did happen early. It happened in week 6 or week 7, sometime in October. So he's going to be plenty healthy come training camp by the sounds of it. Turn on the tape against the Washington Commanders, and this is a guy that's playing multiple roles, mostly playing in the slot, but also playing some in the box, playing some deep, blitzing, as you mentioned, guarding guys like Logan Thomas, J.D. McKissick coming out of the backfield, playing some zone roles over the middle of the field, and having a lot of responsibility in that defense. And you could tell that he was able to handle most of it, sifting through options in zone coverage, understanding motion and how it affects where his assignments are, banged up the seam with Jordan Thomas, who's a good tight end in Washington that he's running up the seam with. J.D. McKissick, good pass catching back that he was able to match out of the backfield on a couple of routes. That tape that you saw against the Commanders last year and some of those early season tapes with the Giants last year reminded me a ton of Adrian Phillips. And I think that that's probably the best comp on the Patriots' current roster. I think Duggar and Peppers are a little bit different players in terms of physicality, play strength. I think Duggar's a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker, brings a little bit more in that respect of the game. But in terms of how he was used, the assignments that he was used in, the roles, those types of things, he reminds me a whole lot of Adrian Phillips a couple of years ago when I watched Adrian Phillips from the Chargers and was projecting him forward to the Patriots. So we know Belichick loves these types of guys. If it was up to Belichick, he'd probably roster 10 safeties, right? And it can never have too many of these versatile hybrid safety types. Peppers fits that mold again. And not only can he contribute on defense, although he had some issues early on in his career with fumbling, muff punts, things like that, I would expect him to throw his name in the ring for punt returner to replace Gunnar Olszewski. Why not?
Kick returner too.
Yeah, I would expect them to put him back there. And the more that you can do for the football team, the more likelihood that it is that you're going to make the squad and be a contributor on Sundays and on game days. So checks a lot of boxes, gives them more depth at safety, gives them another return option with the way that things are looking there without Gunnar. And the last big picture thing I wanted to bring up here, we've talked about this a few times. Jonathan Jones tweeted about it right at the beginning of free agency, and that tweet's gotten a lot of love and a lot of attention. Positionless football in the secondary. And when we cover the Patriots, we're always looking for Bill Belichick's latest zag. What's the move that he's going to make to go against the curve, to go against the grain, while everybody else is out there paying J.C. Jackson $17, $18 million a year and drafting corners in the top 10 like Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn last year, and I'm sure Derek Stingley and Amon Gardner this year. When all these teams are putting such stock in outside cornerback talent, it would not surprise me if Bill Belichick looks at that and says, well, now the value around the league is at safety, it's at nickel corner, and I'm not going to worry too much about where everybody's going to play and if we have a true outside guy that can play there full time and all that kind of stuff, and more look at how can we build a secondary that is filled with guys that can just do everything. And that to me, I think is a big indication of a lot of these signings, right? We have Terrence Mitchell and Malcolm Butler and a Mac Wilson trade. And now you bring in a guy like Jabrill Peppers, where all of these parts are seemingly interchangeable. You might not have one guy that can go out on the outside and shut anybody down right now, but you could throw last offseason a guy like Jalen Mills into that category too, who can just basically do whatever he wants and move around and play different roles. I look at this back end now for the Patriots and I say, okay, well, you have two options. You can either spend big on a corner, you can draft one in the first round, or you can go for a bunch of smart, instinctive football players that can play a bunch of different roles and move around the secondary and match up week to week based off of skill sets and mix and match and make it work. And something tells me that that's where we're headed a little bit more with Bill Belichick, because the value of this outside cornerback group in free agency in the draft is skyrocketing. Everybody on the cornerback group, if you're a good outside corner, you hit free agency, you're getting $17-18 million a year without breaking a sweat. If you're a good outside corner in the draft like Amon Gardner, you're going 5th overall. The Patriots aren't going to get that guy. So you might as well find other guys that you can be able to get. To me, I think that that's really where we're headed with a lot of these moves, and Jabrill Peppers kind of fits that mold.
Well, then the next guy, I hinted at it before, and I know realistically he may be too expensive. But, man, if you add Tyrann Mathieu to the secondary right now.
Yeah.
And then, you draft a guy like Ka'ir Elam, there's something there. If this is the route they want to go and be zone and positionless, Peppers and Mathieu, those are the kind of guys you want. It's not going to happen. I'm going to get myself all excited for Tyrann Mathieu because he is probably my favorite college football player I've ever seen. I believe he's the most dominant college football player I've ever watched. And I watched Bush. I watched Tebow. Cam would be like the closest, but the way he impacted the game on the defensive side of the ball, college, pros, any level, I've never seen anybody impact the game as a defender the way Tyrann Mathieu did at LSU. But that's another point for another time. One other thing I want to touch on, you talk about the depth. I think it's more than just, it's safety. I think what would the opposite of the front seven be? The back seven? I don't know if that's really a term people use, but I mean, Jabrill Peppers can play. They can have him play off the ball linebacker. They can have him be an edge rusher on third downs. I mean, he's not really going to set the edge against the run, but 3rd and 10, throw him out there at the edge, send him after the quarterback. He can play in the slot. He can play a little outside. He can play box safety, deep safety. It's not just, insurance for Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips. This is a guy that this is Bill's whole thing. And he talks about this all the time. When you have the backups, right? You can only have so many backups. You only have so many players on your roster. You have more positions than you have players on your roster. So you need guys who can be a backup at multiple spots.
Right.
How many spots is Jabrill at the very least? Let's say he doesn't totally hit that ceiling. He's a serviceable player. At the very least, how many spots is Jabrill Peppers a backup at for this team?
Right.
I almost want to compare him to like Brock Holt.
Money backer, right? That will money backer role. I also look at it and I say, okay, so you can have now some of these packages against some of these teams. Now, I'm not going to recommend it. Like when they play Buffalo, Buffalo found its running game in the second half of last year. And I don't know if you can go dime, quarters defense, 6-7 DBs against Buffalo. You might get run over now with the way that the Bills were able to adapt their offense and use the run game a little bit more. But I do think there are going to be matchups where the Patriots are going to look at it and say, we're going to just put all of our speed and all of our DBs on the field. All these guys can play at the linebacker level. They can do different things at that level that maybe a linebacker couldn't. And that's sort of what I'm anticipating now moving forward as well, is we've talked so much about off-ball linebackers in this draft, right? From Devin Lloyd to Kobe Dean to the day 2 guys like Mama and Beavers and Quay and Tyndall and just, Troy Anderson and just go on down the line. And I wonder, with all these moves, you got Jawan Bentley under contract. They got Cameron McGrone and Raekwon McMillan coming back off of injuries. At what point do you also look at it and say, well, even if we do draft, unless he really comes in here like Christian Barmore did last year and blows us out of the water and is an absolute stud, is there a role for that traditional linebacker to play a ton as a top 50 pick by the Patriots? If the Patriots were to take a guy like Nakobe Dean or Devin Lloyd, or I guess Dean's kind of in a different category, but let's stick with like Devin Lloyd or Mama or Walker or any of those guys. Now you look at it and you say, okay, well, where is his 3-down role? Because on third down, we're probably going to just put all these safeties out there, be running 3 or 4 safety packages in passing situations. And that's going to be a better upgrade for us. Obviously, you would hope that that player could maybe unseat Juwan Bentley at some point in his rookie season. But does the need for off-ball linebacker, is that still a top tier need for you after all of these offseason moves? Mac Wilson's trade, Jabrill Peppers brought in, all these different moving parts now. Is off-ball linebacker still near the top? I don't even know if we either one of us ever had it at number one, but it was always high.
Yeah, I had it in the top 3. I think it's a good point. They have done a lot at the linebacker position. And the way I look at it, Mac Wilson's still young. What is he, 25, 26 years old? Another guy who, like Jabrill Peppers, I don't know that his lack of NFL success is because he's not a good enough player. It's that nature versus nurture thing, right? I don't think the Browns really were using him correctly. I don't think they were allowing him to play to his strengths. Is Mac Wilson, and he's a little bit older, obviously, but let's say as a prospect, and I use the term prospect loosely because Mac Wilson's been in the league, but as a prospect, Mac Wilson's probably on par with most of those day 2 linebackers we've been talking about, right? Chad Muma, Quay Walker. I don't know if you would agree with that, but I'm kind of starting to feel that way. If they want to go day 3, Nate Landman, Aaron Hanford, I still don't think it would be a bad idea to add another body. But for all the needs they've piled up this offseason, we talked a lot about this, how the draft board changed because corner became more of a need than we anticipated. Guard became more of a need than we anticipated, right? For all the needs it feels like they've added to the draft board, it does feel like linebacker has fallen. The 2 tiers we've used or I've used a lot on the show are immediate needs and luxury needs, right? An immediate need is you don't have the bodies. You don't have NFL caliber talent.
Right.
A luxury need is you have guys, but you could upgrade. It is starting to feel like linebackers shifting more towards that luxury need category. And look, you're counting on some things there. You're counting on Mac Wilson to kind of right what was wrong in Cleveland. You're counting on Raekwon McMillan, Terez Hall, Cameron McGrone to come back healthy and look good. Teams do this sometimes. You need to fill a position. You don't have a sure way to fill it. You find 4 or 5 guys who are coin flips, and odds are one of them is going to pan out. And it kind of feels like that's what they're doing at linebacker. I don't think that's a sustainable thing to do at a lot of positions over a long period of time. Here and there, it's not a horrible way to go about it. I'm okay with where the Patriots are at linebacker. They could be better. But I think that's, if there's one position I think they've done the best job of addressing so far this offseason, it's the linebacker position. I've liked the moves there.
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm at too. If you feel like your evaluation, for example, on a guy like Devin Lloyd is that guy is going to be, I don't want to say Micah Parsons, but in that category, right? A day one impact star player. They still could use that guy in their front 7 that changes the equation for them a little bit more, that pushes the needle further a little bit more. But you just mentioned some of those day 2, day 3 guys. Now we're getting into that mix, and I am starting to think, wouldn't you, I wouldn't say wouldn't you rather, but at this point with the resources that they have, it might be a better use of those resources to look at some other positions and let's see what they get out of Cameron McGrone. Let's see what they get out of Raekwon McMillan. Let's see what they get out of all these safeties that they've brought in, and if they can be a little bit more positionless or hybrid safety types playing linebacker roles. If you draft a linebacker on day 2, but the plan on third down is to have 4 safeties out there, then where does he play? Unless he can play on the line of scrimmage, then where does he play? So that's a big thing for me as well with all this. The other shoe I think is that might actually drop once we get into training camp a little bit more. A lot of these moves this offseason that they've made as well kind of signal that guys like Miles Bryant in particular, but I'd also mention Jawan Williams in this category, and the coaches' minds just weren't cutting it last year. And they bring in veteran guys. Peppers can play in the slot. I think Malcolm Butler is best used as a wide corner, but I think he can also potentially play nickel or in the slot, especially at this stage of his career. I look at those 2 moves in particular, Terrence Mitchell adding some depth at veteran corner on the outside, and say that the Patriots have reservations about ever having to go back into a playoff game or a meaningful game with Miles Bryant as their starting slot corner. They seem to be adding layers there to avoid that situation happening again. It's no slight on Miles Bryant. I think he's a nice player to have at the back end of your roster, potentially practice squad guy that could get elevated when needed. But clearly, I think they recognize that Bryant in particular, a full-time role for him in this defense is probably asking a little bit too much out of him.
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
All right, let's move on to some Robert Kraft comments this morning. Speaking to the
you
media,
want a little breaking news for us here?
We really
It's
need
not,
no.
Well, this is really just for us. Nobody in the chat's going to care, but I would have texted you this if we weren't on. The NFL is bringing back open locker rooms in 2022 for the media.
There we go. I love that. That's good news.
Yeah, that's so we can get a little more of the personality of the players now, which will be nice. I know people enjoy that. So
yeah, I mean, it's disappointing that when you have all these new faces and you're trying to usher in a new regime of players and Matthew Judon and Jalen Mills and all these guys come in last offseason, Hunter Henry and Nelson Aguilar Bourne, all that stuff happens last offseason. And the closest that we get to having a real interaction with these players is at the podium. There's no side conversations. There's no off the record conversations with any of these guys. And to me, that's where a lot of the information, especially I would say for me personally, from a football standpoint, because somebody might not tell me on the record where exactly he was supposed to be or who was exactly supposed to be where, but I might be able to get somebody to tell me it off the record, right? And then I can use that in my analysis. So that's a big thing too. With it, I say bigger for me personally, the football side of it. So I think that would be fun. All right, Robert Kraft it spoke this morning. Bill Belichick spoke yesterday. We didn't have a podcast yesterday. What were your biggest takeaways here from RKK though? Because he did. Do you feel like he put any pressure on Belichick? Because I feel like he tries to, but he also knows in the back of his head, I'd be absolutely crazy to get rid of Bill Belichick. So we're not actually going to do that. But I got to say some things in the media to be a little bit more pushy with where we're at right now as an organization.
I think if anything, he put pressure on Matt Groh, with the comment about, we had a good draft last year. I hope we keep doing that. Made up for the last 4 years. This is how, we need to build to win. And I've said this offseason. I think this is the whole plan. I think, what are they doing in free agency? The plan is to add the impact players in the draft. And that's much easier said than done. But that was my big takeaway from what Kraft said, because they got to go to him and tell him how much money they plan to spend. And I'm sure, they probably got up to him that this is what we're going to do. We trust Matt and, Elliott Wolf and those guys we're going to replicate what we did last year. Realistically, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. If they added 3 impact players in the draft last year, right? In Mac Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, Christian Barmore, 3 immediate impact players. If they add 3 or 4 immediate impact players this year, they're actually in pretty good shape. And then the other thing, thank you in the chat. Somebody probably something in the chat. The other thing Kraft kind of hinted at is they're counting on internal growth, and not just from last year's rookies like Mac and Barmore and Stevenson, but guys who now have a second year in the system. Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, Jonnu Smith, right? Bill kind of talked about this with Jonnu Smith as well yesterday. I think that the plan is, and I know it's not sexy, it's not what anybody wants to hear, any of it. I really think the plan is internal growth and playmakers in the draft. They're not trying to be splashing free agency. They're counting on their guys to get better and cheap talent in the draft. I think that's the plan between what Bill said and what Kraft said. You can agree with it. You can disagree with it. I think that's what they're trying to do. I think that's how they're trying to make the team better this year, is they're going to count on just the guys they already have in the room getting better and plugging those holes with guys in the draft.
One of the things that Belichick said yesterday that I thought flew under the radar a little bit that's along these lines, he mentioned Matt Groh's handling of the draft last year as the director of college scouting and said he thought that Macro was one of the best people they had ever had in that position. I think he was talking about the director of college scouting position, not the director of player personnel, this position that Macro's in now. So last year, he gave Macro a lot of the credit for putting their board together. Essentially said he put the draft together, right? And that's really where he gave a lot of the credit to. We've talked about it in the past with guys like Elliott Wolf, guys like Dave Ziegler. Their backgrounds are mostly in pro personnel scouting and the pro game. Right. Groh is more of a college scout and a college.
I mean, he's all that's his whole background.
Right. So I believe that Bill is telling the truth when he says that Matt Groh was the driving force behind the draft last year. And it was pretty clear that Bill thought the most successful thing about their entire offseason last year was the draft. And that's why he promoted the draft guy to director of player personnel. So,
and I mean, wasn't it? I wouldn't disagree with him if that's his thought.
No. And I look at what Robert Kraft said today. He continues to harp on the fact that they need to build through the draft. And you're right, Matt Groh's the guy. He's the guy that they're hoping can hit on another couple of draft picks here, point Belichick in the right direction, get them some good players in April, and that's going to be their main offseason additions. I also like when Robert Kraft speaks like he's a fan or like he's one of us when he talks about Bill's moves, and he's like, I try to stay out of it because I know I don't know enough to really interject, but it also looks a little funny to me, the coaching staff that we're putting together. So I'm trusting that Bill Belichick has the right idea here and is the super genius that we all think he is, and that the results are going to speak for themselves. But Kraft went in a little bit about the coaching staff and admitted that even he doesn't always see the direction that the Patriots are going in. And Belichick himself confirmed yesterday that they are going to move Matt Patricia to offense. Joe Judge is going to be heavily involved in the offense. I still hope that Troy Brown and Nick Haley are going to be the driving forces there, but it doesn't seem like it. It kind of seems like they're going to allow Patricia and Judge to be the big contributors or the heavy hitters on that side of the football. I still don't feel great about it. I understand that Robert Kraft's angle is probably the correct answer for all of us on the outside looking in to say, Bill Belichick knows a thing or two about what he's doing. Let's let him do his thing. But to put Mac Jones, put this offense in those two guys' hands, it still doesn't leave a whole lot of excitement or trust in either one of those people until we see it out there on the field and that see Matt Patricia and Joe Judge doing a good job.
Right.
All right. What else do we got here? From RKK. Overtime. Yeah, we can talk some overtime rules. I got to admit, this one for me is, I can't understand for the life of me why people care so much about this. I understand we care so much about everything, and that's just the nature of the beast. But I really don't understand why everybody gets so damn worked up about overtime rules of all things. You look at my Twitter timeline after this news came out today that they're changing the OT rules for the playoffs, and everybody's freaking out about it or has a take or whatever. I honestly could care less which way it is. I think this way, when you look at the playoffs, you look at the history of the playoffs, when you have the best quarterbacks in the league playing in these playoff games, the Patrick Mahomes is the world, the Joe Burrows, Josh Allen, Tom Brady, obviously, Aaron Rodgers, whatever. When you give them the football and a chance to win the game, and you say you drive the field, you score a touchdown, you win the game, you go to the next round, you go to the Super Bowl, these guys are almost automatic. And I think that's what these owners look at, and they see that 10-2 record for the team that possesses the ball first in overtime and look at a competitive imbalance when they see that record. I think there's more to that record than meets the eye at times, but ultimately this was always going to happen because of that 10-2 mark. If this was 8 and a little bit more even, right? If we're 8-4, if we're 7-5, then maybe we're not having this conversation today. But 10-2 is way too stark of a difference for people to not look at it and say, are these rules really fair? But why do people get so fired up about this, Alex? Because I can't really figure it out.
Because their team lost and they don't want to admit that their team is bad. this whole thing is so stupid. It's so dumb. Overtime's not going to be fair. It's not in a sport like football. That's the reality of it. If it was fair, the fair way to do it would be to get rid of any concept of sudden death and just play 15 minutes straight up.
Like hockey does in the playoffs, right? Just play until somebody...
No, hockey's sudden death. No, like soccer.
No, hockey in the playoffs is not sudden death. Oh, it is sudden death, but they keep playing until there's a winner, right?
No, but I'm saying I don't care if you score and then stop the other team and then score
so
again.
I got you.
So like that's the only way it's going to be fair. And look, that's not going to happen because the union's not going to allow them to add that many snaps. But I think the thing that everybody's forgetting here, there should be no incentive for teams to take the game to overtime. Yes, if you're trailing and it's either overtime or you lose, then yes, you want overtime, right? If you're down 7 with 10 seconds to go, you're not just going to kick a field goal. Obviously. There should not be incentive for the Buffalo Bills to go into the prevent defense of all time because if the game goes to overtime, that's fine. We'll have our shot. Like that needs to be decentivized.
Yeah.
You should not. Overtime is we got to wrap this up because we've got to go home for dinner and the streetlights are coming on. That's all overtime is supposed to be. Overtime isn't supposed to be a viable strategy to win games. And that's the problem here. You're just making it easier. You're making it easier to win in overtime because now you don't have to necessarily get a defensive stop. And by the way, for all the people saying it's not fair that the two teams don't get the same number of possessions, what happens when Team A scores a touchdown? Right, because the defense is so gassed at that point. You can't count on the defense. Okay, fine. Team A gets the ball. They score because the defense is gassed. Team B then gets the ball. They score because the defense is gassed. You know what it is now? It's the old overtime rules. The ones where you could win the game by going 40 yards and kicking a field goal. Yeah. Now that's back with the gas defenses. It's not going to be fair. It's never going to be fair. Teams should have a fair chance. The fair chance is win the game in regulation. That's your fair chance. You have a 60-minute fair chance to win the football game. After that, it all goes out the window. So don't go into prevent defense. Don't start benching players. Don't, we'll give them a field goal, whatever. No, win the game in the time allotted. After that, I have no sympathy for you whatsoever. Like, I don't necessarily care that they changed the rule or they didn't. I just think this is so baseball. This is what baseball does all the time. They solve problems that didn't exist. Like, this doesn't solve anything. If anything, it makes it worse.
Doesn't solve anything, but in the interest of fairness, now nobody can ever say again that my quarterback didn't touch the football in overtime. And that's ultimately all that it is.
But what it's going to become is, well, their quarterback got the ball twice, and our quarterback only got the ball once. They just had to kick a field goal. Like, this is just responding to people bitching. But I think people are still going to bitch.
I think the hardest part that people had with the overtime rules, the way that they were, is that Josh Allen never gets the ball. That Patrick Mahomes in the 18 AFC title game never gets the ball.
That sucks.
I get what you're saying.
The Bills had 60 minutes. The Bills had no. Let me say it. The Bills had 60 minutes to put the ball in Josh Allen's hands. They had 60 minutes, 6-0, to put the ball in Josh Allen's hands, and they didn't take it. I don't have any sympathy for them at that point. I didn't have sympathy. I don't have sympathy for it either. For anything. It's stupid.
I honestly could care less about it. Like, play whatever overtime rules you want to play. But what I come back to is two things. One, the league doesn't want the outcry about the overtime rules to exist anymore because the league.
But this isn't going to change that. There's still going to be outcry.
Wait, number two, and I think the most important thing out of all of this is that, and this is why I don't fully understand why they didn't just adopt a college style overtime, because ultimately what I think that they want is they want dueling star quarterbacks in overtime on a playoff stage, right? They want Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen to be going back and forth in a winner take all playoff game, essentially in a sudden death format, but not really a sudden death format.
This isn't that. It's clearly not that.
Right. This is what that's right. The problem is they should have gone with the college style overtime, if they wanted that, it's overtime. And the two best quarterbacks in the league are going toe to toe, even though that already happens in the fourth quarter of most games.
Right.
If they wanted that theater, then they should have just gone all in on a college style overtime so that that was the setup. Now it feels like you've been saying, team A scores, team B scores, team A kicks a field goal, team B cries. That's exactly what it feels
Now
like we're setting up for now.
Well, they won the toss, so they only needed to kick a field goal to win the game. It's the coin, the coin, the coin.
Well, and then there's
Again,
the other argument that now, and this is where I was going to take it in a second.
Yeah.
If you're Bill Belichick, because Bill's now thinking about this as a strategy, right? Of what's the best course for me to do, and he'll base it off of what's going on in game and how his defense is playing, offense is playing, all that stuff. Do you take the ball to start overtime, or do you kick it away and know what you're up against, right? Because if the opponent doesn't score or the opponent kicks a field goal, then you know that if you score a touchdown, you've won the football game. I think that there's going to be a lot of teams, Patriots potentially included, that are now going to defer in overtime. They're going to kick the ball away in overtime first instead of taking the football like most teams do, or 99% of teams do. So I don't know. I'm not saying that makes it any more fun, that there's this little added wrinkle of chess strategy or whatever, but
no,
it's
an interesting conversation too. It's an interesting strategy conversation because, again, if you get the ball first, assuming matching results, all you need is a field goal to win the game. So there's that advantage. On the other hand, if you get the ball second, you know what you need to do to win the game. You can, even if you give up a touchdown, if they kick the extra point, you can go score and go for two, and then they don't get the shot at that field goal. So I think it comes down to your roster. Do you have better offense, defense, etc.? But it's still not. It's like, I don't want to hear that overtime needs to be fair, because the only ways to make overtime, there's only two ways to make overtime fair. I'm not going to bring it down to a 5. This is annoying. I'm sick of having this conversation. I'm sick of Bills and Chiefs fans bitching about it and using it as excuses why their team lost.
That's why we have to talk about it.
There's only two ways to make overtime fair, realistically. I said before, first off, play 15 minutes. Play 15 minutes. It doesn't matter what happens. It's whoever's winning, you play a fifth quarter. No sudden death, you play fifth quarter. The other way to make it fair is win by 2. So you turn the clock off.
Right.
You go back and forth. And basically, a team has to score. You have to get 2 unanswered scores, right? So I guess touchdown. If you get a touchdown, the other team kicks a field goal, I guess you'd win. But you give both teams an even chance to answer. Neither of those will pass because they revolve significantly more snaps, and the Union won't go for it, nor should they. Overtime's not going to be fair. The problem is there's this misconception that overtime is supposed to be fair. I'll say it again. You have 60 minutes to win the football game. And I saw somebody in the chat say, well, so does the other team. Yes, it's sports. One team's going to win. One team's going to lose. That's how this works. Okay, not everybody can win. You have 60 minutes to win the football game. That's the fairness. That's the far point. That's the fair part.
Right.
60 minutes to win the football game. If you don't want it to come down to a coin flip, if you don't want it to come down to 50-50, I win the football game within those 60 minutes. I don't have pity for you if you can't win the game within those 60 minutes. That's pretty much where I'm at with it.
Ultimately,
if they can't make it fair. It will never be fair. So just suck it up, deal with it, win in regulation.
Ultimately, just change it to college style, because that's where I know the league wants to go. I think it's a little bit too gimmicky for the NFL, and some of the old school guys that run the league and some of the old owners and coaches like Bill Belichick are going to be like, this is not an arcade game, right? This is an NFL football game, and they're not going to want to do that. But I think ultimately in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to get to the point where it's basically set up like college.
I just real quick side tangent here, because I think I just backed myself into a corner. Don't the analytics say don't play for overtime?
The analytics always skew more aggressive, right? Whether it's going for it on 4th down, whether it's don't play for over, they look at overtime and say there's a lot more outcomes. There's a lot more variables that we can't control. Whereas if we go to tie the game at the end of regulation and we go for 2, we control, it's one play that we have to win.
Right.
Whereas if we go to overtime, you're opening up a whole nother can of worms. So I would say that they probably lean a little bit more towards avoiding overtime, but it's
Right, they
never
finally got one right.
yeah.
They
Okay.
finally got one right.
Last thing here before we wrap things up. This name has been out there a lot, and I wanted to quickly mention this as a topic just because I know Patriots fans have heard these rumors, not necessarily related to the Patriots, but DK Metcalf, what's going to happen with him in Seattle? Last year of his contract on his rookie deal, pre-agency. Bill Simmons coined that phrase, not me. I'm going to use it. Pre-agency DK Metcalf, meaning now is a time where he's going to decide whether it's going to be a long-term extension in Seattle or it's going to be playing elsewhere this time next year or even sooner than that. We've seen so many different receivers at this point, from Tyreek Hill to Devontae Adams to all these guys over the last couple of years that have moved on this contract year because the team can't agree to a long-term extension. Their current club can't agree to a long-term extension. The starting point with DK Metcalf is $20 million per year. The deal that Mike Williams got, the 3 for $60 from the Chargers, that's the absolute low point for a DK Metcalf contract. My guess is that he probably might hit a 5-year, $100 million deal. Not obviously fully guaranteed, but somewhere around that. Do you buy that the Seahawks want to keep DK Metcalf? Because I believe that Pete Carroll used the same phrase he used with Russell Wilson when he said, we plan on, or whatever the wording was, to have DK Metcalf on the roster next year. Said that about Russell Wilson at the combine, and here we are. So do you think that the DK gets moved? Would you like him here in New England if he does get moved? Do you think he's worth it? What would you get up for him? Where are you on this?
Yeah, I see. I don't think Seattle's going to trade him. I know that there's that quote or whatever. And look, he could want out, but they're kind of in a perfect situation where they don't have Russell Wilson's contract weighing them down. They really don't have any big contracts weighing them down.
Yeah,
they can afford to pay him. They're going to have a rookie quarterback on the rookie quarterback deal, the affordable deal. So they're going to have more money to spend. And look, what's the conversation we've been having all off season? I know, the Bengals had it last year. The Jets are having it now. You get the young quarterback. You want to pair him with the stud wide receiver. You're looking for a guy who's probably about 25, 26 as a true deep ball threat. Bengals have him. The Seahawks have him, and the Bengals have him too. But the Seahawks have him in DK Metcalf. I don't see the incentive to move him. Like a guy like Tyler Lockett's 30. By the time they get through this rebuild, Tyler Lockett's not going to be, a contributor. So it makes sense to move him. You come out of the other side of this rebuild, DJ Metcalf's going to be 27, 28. He's going to be right in his prime. And you have that elite receiver for your young quarterback. So I wouldn't, even if he asked for a trade, if I'm the Seahawks, I really dare him to do it. I started 3 first-round picks. And if he's going to let him hold out, right? Let him hold out. Let him waste years off his prime. Let him tank his value. Unless I can get an absolute haul for him, like an absolute haul, because
I think you could. The big question is more. So the phrase that Pete Carroll exactly used was the Seahawks intend to have DK Metcalf on the roster, which is exactly what they said about Russell Wilson. I think the biggest thing is with DK, does DK want to be in Seattle? Now, he's came out and said since the Russell Wilson trade that he feels like the leadership role left by Wilson, left by Bobby Wagner, it's now up to him to step up to that mantle, and talking about being the next guy in Seattle. But if you're DK Metcalf, the options that you can play with at quarterback are so much better out of the other 31 teams that would probably love to have DK Metcalf on their roster than anybody that Seattle's going to get, whether it's Malik Willis or whoever, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. All the other quarterbacks are going to be better pairs for DK than any of those guys. So when I look at Tyreek Hill, I look at Devontae Adams and the way that they essentially force their way out of their current stops. I do wonder if we get to a point with a guy like DK where he's forcing his way out of Seattle more so than the other way around, because he looks at it and says, they have nobody to throw me the football. I'm a downfield receiver. It's not like DK is one of those gadget type of receivers where like a Deebo Samuel, where you can get away with having an average quarterback. You need to have somebody that can push the football accurately to him down the field. Otherwise he's useless. So ultimately, I think he's going to want to trade. What would it take to get him? I think it's at least a first and a second round pick like Devontae Adams got in Green Bay or for Green Bay from the Raiders. The reason why it was so low for that situation, I think, is because Devontae Adams only wanted to go to the Raiders. There was he wasn't going anywhere else. It hurt his market. The trade that the Dolphins made with Kansas City for Tyreek Hill might be a little bit. He's not quite as good of a player as Tyreek Hill. I don't think quite as productive as Tyreek Hill was. But I think you're talking about 5 or 6 draft picks going back to Seattle for a guy like DK.
If I'm Seattle, I don't move him. I think because you're essentially, it's weird. I talked last year a lot about the steps of the rebuild, right?
Yeah.
They have step 2 done. They still need to do step 1, but they have step 2. They have step 2 done. You talk about the quarterbacks in this year's draft. The pitch to DK would be try it with the guys in there for a year. Next year, you got Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Phil Dracovic, Anthony Richardson. You've got some cannon arm quarterbacks coming out next year. If he can put up for 1 year, suddenly if you're DK Metcalf, you're 26 years old, you're about to get the bag, Seattle can give it to you. You've got a capable quarterback. I think it would, so here's the thing. If we're going to do this, right, have this conversation about the wide receivers and the pre-agents and all that, I think I would put DK 3rd or 4th in terms of the most likely to move. He's probably better than some of these other guys, but I think it would make more sense. It would be better use of our time to have this conversation about, I think AJ Brown is the big one, right?
Because that entire, not to revisit the N'Keal Harry thing, but that entire,
it's that entire
draft class is coming up on it. So Terry McLaurin, AJ Brown, Deebo Samuel.
Those are the DK,
3. Hunter Renfrow, if you want to go a little bit deeper, although with Josh McDaniels in Vegas, you would have to assume that Hunter Renfrow is going to be a priority for them. All those guys are now set to be free agents. None of them, obviously, were first-round picks, so they're all on expiring deals. When you look at the Patriots' flexibility, we talked about this a little bit with Miguel when we brought him on early in the offseason, and he discussed the issues that the Patriots have with draft capital. They don't have the capital like Miami did to make that Tyreek Hill trade happen. They don't have the capital to outbid some of these other teams when these guys come available. But that entire draft class is now looking for their payday, and all of them have earned it. Even in the chat, Nick said Deontay Johnson from Pittsburgh is another one. Not necessarily on the DK Metcalf, AJ Brown level, but still a really good player. So all those guys are due for contracts. All those guys could be moved at any time at this point, it feels like, just because we've seen how rocky this gets. Any one of these guys decides that they want out, there comes the trade. This is turning a lot more into the NBA. I don't necessarily like it, but that's kind of where we're at now, where players don't necessarily need to honor contracts and they can force their way out of situations. And this is what we're at. This is where we're at. It's, in terms of the Patriots and all these guys, I just don't see the Patriots ever giving up the draft capital to pull off a trade like Miami made for Tyreek Hill. Giving up Bill Belichick 4 or 5 picks to then go ahead and pay somebody $20 million a year over a 4 or 5 year contract. To me, I don't ever anticipate Bill Belichick being willing to part with that much investment for one player that's not a quarterback. Maybe he would do that for a prime star caliber quarterback, but then I don't even think so. So I don't know if the Patriots are going to be interested in any of these guys. Maybe if they hit free agency next offseason, they could throw a bag at somebody. But in terms of losing draft capital and paying the guy, it seems a little bit lofty to expect the Patriots to get involved in that.
Yeah, again, not all these guys are going to get moved. It doesn't make sense for the Titans to trade AJ Brown. It really doesn't, because their window's so small. They're going to have to, Tannehill's getting up there, and Derrick Henry, relative to running back, is getting up there. They're going to have to rebuild in a year or two anyway. It doesn't make sense to start shrinking that window. AJ Brown, to me, is the guy who's just going to play out the last year of his deal and then hit free agency. So, Again, it's another reason why, if you want to have this conversation about that 2019 class and guys who might be available, I think there's a conversation to be had there. I don't think DK Metcalf is the guy to have that conversation about. Again, I think it's AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel. Those are the guys, right? Titans are towards the end of their window. Jimmy Garoppolo sucks. We don't know what Trey Lance is going to be, but the Niners are kind of a mess. Also, that team's low-key embarrassing the way they keep losing in the playoffs. I could see Debo wanting to get out of there, putting their left tackle in motion. Get the hell out of here with that. And Washington can't lock down a quarterback. And look, maybe they take Malik Willis
if I'm looking at this,
they have Carson Wentz. I forgot. When they traded for Carson Wentz, Terry McLaurin. Maybe you trade for Terry McLaurin. He should ask his way out.
The guy that definitely could want out, and he's a great fit here. Right, plays inside, plays outside, runs great routes, good at the catch point down the field. I mean, he's a great football player. He seems to me like the guy that's most likely to not only pry loose because that organization's just dumb and doesn't know how to handle good assets, but also secondly, want out with Washington. I mean, what has Washington, other than drafting him and giving him an opportunity, what has Washington done for Terry McLaurin? I mean, they've done nothing but kill his career around him. He's an all pro caliber talent that's never been on a good football team, that's hardly ever played with a good quarterback. So yeah, that's the one that I circle and look at and say, okay, well, it'd be nice to dream about Deebo Samuel and correcting that wrong, or DK Metcalf and potentially correcting that wrong. But the guy that I really feel like makes the most sense now is somebody like Terry McLaurin, who has got to be wanting out of Washington. I mean, he just has to.
Yeah.
All right.
I'd agree.
So that about does it here for us today. We're going to cut this one short so that my jaw doesn't explode. Fighting through some pain today. So I appreciate everybody, dealing with that and everything for me. But on Thursday, big show on Thursday, mock draft 2.0. Alex and I got screwed in mock draft 1.0, essentially dealt the worst case scenario, a terrible hand. And now we're hoping mock draft 2.0, we're going to get the best hand possible, be able to take somebody like Jordan Davis or Jameson Williams or Olave or whoever at 21 and go from there. But we're going to have mock draft 2.0 on Thursday afternoon. And then we will be back next week. We're going to start to preview some of these position groups in the draft here on the show. We'll always have these Tuesday shows slated for some news and some latest rumblings and things like that. But we also want to start previewing and doing some deep dives into some of these position groups that the Patriots might be interested at the top of the draft and throughout the draft. So look for that next week as well. But on Thursday, mock draft 2.0. We got great turnout last week. Hopefully we'll get that again this week. And like I said, hopefully the draft will go a little bit better at the top than it did last time, with the simulator absolutely killing us on PFF. Now you can trade veteran players as well. So we can maybe ship a chip like a N'Keal Harry or like Isaiah Wynn or whatever the case may be and get another pick and have some real fun with it. So we'll see you guys on Thursday for mock draft 2.0. And until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and we'll see you in a couple days.